Hey everyone, welcome to, let me do this correctly, summer prep video number 2. So there is a lot of delay in this, not having Wi-Fi in the woods like I thought I would, and having a power outage for about a week. So I'm going to try to make up for it this week with 2 videos. But if you are still working through your summer assignment, the goal is that this can help you with that, and it will also just give you some more preparation for when we start the year. So I had a question as people were doing their terms about a republic or a democracy. As you go through your terms, you'll see that they're very similar, and at times that can be confusing. So I tried to break it down in a few ways. Both of these two things are political systems, right? And both are systems where people are represented by officials who take an oath that they will protect their interests. Okay, so if it's a pure democracy, laws are made directly by the voting majority. So everyone gets to vote on all the laws. That means the minority often are unprotected. Oh, this is the loud truck that goes by at this time every night. It has obnoxious lights all over it. Okay, so in other words, the minority can always get outvoted. Okay, now in a republic, laws are made by representatives, right? They're chosen from these people, but they don't have to respond to just those people. They also have to comply with the Constitution, and that Constitution should protect those rights from the will of the majority. So that they can't just be outvoted if it's something that actually violates their rights. Okay, so the United States is pretty much a republic, but it's usually described as a representative democracy. You hear some other terms, but all right, what does that mean? Okay, I want to give you an example here from New Jersey that was just a few years ago. Okay, so in New Jersey, 8 years ago, I guess that's not a few, but few enough. Oh, geez. All right, so there is an issue of same-sex marriage. And Governor Christie said, you know what, why don't we let the people of New Jersey vote on whether same-sex marriage should be legal or not? And this actually, we'll learn about this year about popular sovereignty back in the days of Lincoln and the Lincoln-Douglas debates. But the idea that Lincoln once said is that, if you just let the public at large vote, that could go against the constitutional right. So some people would say, if everyone in New Jersey just voted on whether gay marriage should be legal or not, that could violate the minority, at this time being gays that wanted marriage, if they think the Constitution should protect that from them. That makes sense. Okay, so in a republic, laws are made by representatives chosen, like I said, but they have to sort of comply with whatever set of laws or rights they have. Okay, oops. So I want to talk a little bit about Federalist 10. You'll see that that is one of the documents. We'll be talking a lot about Federalist 10 this year. I've written about it. I've done papers on it. We'll have discussions about it. But one of the big components of Federalist 10, written by Madison, is about factions and the republic versus democracy. So let's read a little portion here. He wrote, "From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction." So what does that faction mean? "A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence, it is that such democracies have been spectacles of turbulence and contention," right? Think of turbulence on a plane, right? It's causing these problems. "Have they ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property?" Property is this big part about factions. "And have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Like, this is a big reason why democracies haven't always worked, because they have to figure out this problem. The effect of the first difference of republic is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, these are the representatives, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. It means like you put justice and your values ahead of party. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that the public voice, pronounced by the representatives of the people, will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by themselves convened for the purpose, so that these representatives would be a buffer between popular opinion and justice. Like, these representatives would be like, I know they voted me, but I still have to do what is right here. Okay, and that's been a thing over time in our country. Should people elected to office just do what their constituents think they should do, or should they think they do what's right and constitutional to do? So a few things here. Remember this year we learned that, or last year, or 2 years ago when you were a freshman, you learned about the different types of governments and what would be best. And Montesquieu often wrote that a republic would not be good if it was big. And Madison tries to explain why. And keep in mind, once again, that the Federalist Papers were written by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay to defend the Constitution so that people pass it, because people weren't really like all on board with it at once. So they're like, no, this is why democracy, this is why this representative democracy will work. This is why it's different than other things we've done here. So you see then it sort of filters. Now there's been different examples of representative democracy in history. So just so you know, and we'll talk about those this year. So a little bit more on Federalist 10. So I'm going to read a little bit about what I wrote. I wrote on Federalist 10 about a year ago, but I'll try to ad-lib a little bit here. So Federalist 10 was written under the pseudonym Publius in 1787. We already mentioned that James Madison was one of the three authors. So Madison's writings soberly defended the Constitution and revealed how he was concerned with stability and practicality. And Federalist 10, his goal was to allay the concerns of such opponents by defining factions and outlining how to deal with them. He explained that contrary to the argument, it was the large number of factions and the diversity of the growing republic that would avoid such a tyranny. Now remember, the republic was nothing as big as the republic is today, right? But it was still large and growing. The biggest concern of factions in his writing stemmed from examples such as religious factions, which were really all different forms of Christianity at the time, but mostly over factions between those who owned property and those who didn't. So we're not talking about like race or gender or sexuality or any of those things really at the time. According to Madison, this large republic would be the guarantor of justice and stability to the new Constitution, and its citizens would be protected regardless of their beliefs of the amount of property they owned. Madison explains in his piece not only how a large republic brings stability, but how factions would bring a threat to the republic if it was not enlarged. So he actually wanted it to keep getting bigger. As time passed, others like Alexis de Tocqueville observed American life and expanded on these ideas of Madison. We don't need to know much about him yet. He was a Frenchman that now that they were having a revolution, he wanted to see like, well, how does democracy work in America? And he went around America and observed how we functioned under our democracy and explained why it worked. So he elaborated on these ideas. Then we also later have Roosevelt, who during the progressive era, which we won't get to early in the year, but later, how did the progressive era of, like, say, the early 1900s go back to these ideas? So decades later, industrialization changed the social environment, but progressive leaders like Roosevelt still worried about the dangers that stemmed from factions. It was different factions then. Think more about companies and things like that, but still. As our country continues to expand and diversify, it's important to continue to analyze the effects that factions can bring to our federal government and how their effects can keep coming at bay. So let's see if I can explain this here. In Federalist 10, Madison described what a faction is. He says, you can see here, a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. So the latter part of the statement refers to how factions can endanger the rights of others in a lasting way that also endangers the interests of the entire community. So in a society where people have liberties, people will have their own opinions and interests that will at times oppose the opinions or interests of others. We see that to this day, right? He wrote, and you see here, as long as the reason of man continues to be fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. This is sort of common sense, right? These can be strong opinions from individuals who feel that their beliefs are infallible to associations and institutions that such individuals might belong to. These differing views are a consequence of liberty, right? Because you have the freedom to have your opinion, different opinions will exist. So as a further result, factions are going to naturally arise. By describing a faction as a group that is adverse to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community, it enforces that any group with common interests is not a faction, but instead only a group of citizens with common interests that are dangerous to the rights of other citizens or interests or to the community in its entirety is a faction. Does that make sense? So a faction is only a faction if it actually endangers rights. Otherwise, it's just a group with opinions. So some might wonder if a difference of opinions can actually be detrimental to the Republic, which is why Madison strengthened his statement by stating that rights could be harmed in a way that was permanent and aggregate. Two traits that would seem to appear from a despotic country rather than a democratic one. So he writes in Federalist Paper 10 that the biggest problem that faces democracy, so the biggest problem in democracy, hands down, is the problem of factions, right? That's why this is important. So even in a government set up with, what is it set up with? Checks and balances, right? That check the abuse of power and prevent despotism. Despotism can arise in other forms. Despotism does not have to be by one supreme leader, right? Institutions can become despotic. These institutions can be supported by the tyranny of the majority. In this way, the despot that arises from democracies does not have to use force, but rather rely on the indifference of people or majority-backed opinions. In this way, the rights of any minority faction can be overlooked if it goes against the interests or beliefs of a majority. What concerned Madison is that factions are concerned about their own interests, not what's the best interest for the nation as a whole. This force working against the public interest could often infringe upon the rights of other citizens. These effects pose a true threat to a Republican government. It is because of this that the rights of the minority have to be protected, just like everyone else, and a check be made in any such large factions. So how do you sort of do this? How do you get rid then of these dangers of it? Right? So due to this danger, Madison outlines two ways to remove factions. One way is to remove the cause of factions, which essentially requires people to have the same opinions. How is that even possible, right? It's not. And even if it was possible, it would destroy liberty, which the founders were bound to protect. So of the two ways, one way is already out the window. The second way would be to control the effects of factions, requiring a method to prevent a majority interest from forming, or if formed, make it difficult for the members to unite. So since the first method was not practical nor consistent with the ideas of the founding, he explained that the creation of factions cannot be stopped, but it was possible to control the effects of them. His idea to do so was by having an extended republic. So hopefully you see now how it all comes together. So in the past, the solution to the problem of faction was always to have small republics. But Madison is not convinced that that's correct. So many previous political philosophers, from Plato to Rousseau and Montesquieu, people hopefully you remember from freshman year, even to Marx, who we'll learn about, thought that a small republic would create a certain degree of sameness amongst its population. Their common history or even their cultural geography would create a people with more opinions and interests in common than different. Therefore, a small republic would create a more peaceful and stable state without a faction over-empowering and oppressing another one. But Madison did not agree with this. In fact, he thought just the opposite, that extended republics were the solution to the problem of factions. According to Madison, a majority faction could more easily do something in a small republic where a common and a limited set of opinions emerged. If you enlarge the orbit, right, it would weave more factions into the fabric, right? So as it gets bigger, more and more factions. So it's not just 1, 2, 3. You get more, which sort of lessens the effects of bigger ones. It would create a more diverse set of opinions and make the omnipotence of one majority faction more difficult to materialize. The various groups would have no opinion but to negotiate with each other and come to compromises, which would ultimately respect the rights of minority interests. The larger the republic, the larger the diversity of interests, not just of religious interests, but also in the differences, for example, between bankers and farmers, which was a big thing then through the progressives with industrialists. When the republic increases under a larger umbrella, it would be difficult for one large majority to develop. And there would most likely be even more than just two sides forming, so it wouldn't just be a majority and a minority. In a small democracy, one group dominated. But if you enlarge that orbit that the republic encompasses, there are more groups to balance everyone else. There will still be individuals pursuing their own interests, but there will be other individuals with competing interests, and they will level the playing field, so to speak. Therefore, according to Federalist 10, the bigger the republic, the more differences amongst the people exist to prevent one group from taking over. Okay, so Madison explained that having a large republic provided more advantages than having a population with a diversity of interests and opinions that created less opportunity to vex and oppress others. As the republic and its population grows, there will be more people to be chosen as representatives, and that will likely lead to representatives with the best abilities and characteristics to govern. Do we think the best people are representatives now? Some might disagree, but something to think about. Madison hoped that people will elect those who best discern the true interest of their country and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations, and therefore will minimize the dangerous effects of factions. So you need to pardon me because I don't really normally read from like things I've written. But since we're setting a foundation, it's good to start getting the big ideas here. So just so you know, right, this is Madison. You can look online. There are people that disagreed with this opinion. This is from Forbes magazine. This is from 8 years ago. But if you want to look this up by Lawrence Hunter, he thinks Madison was wrong about this idea. So it's always good from an academic standpoint to try to look at the opposite sides. And that is something for the AP papers, you're going to have to address the opposite argument for any question they have. So it's good to get familiar with them and see which one you agree with, but can you look and see both sides? Okay, so we covered a little bit of things here. We covered Republic and democracy, some ideas about Federalist 10, what are factions, the ideas about growing a country, is it good or not? If you have questions on this, let me know. I'm going to do a very basic video for the rest, for the second one for this week, just covering a few terms, no big soliloquies or lectures like today. But I wanted to get this out there to you guys. Please make sure you're turning into the news, you're turning into the developments with the campaign and the Democratic ticket coming to completion this week, and you'll see something on that for the weekly discussion. All right, hope everyone is well.